My son, my own flesh and blood, essentially sent me to a hotel so his in-laws could stay in my house. And believe it or not, just 1 hour after they set foot in what used to be my sanctuary, those same in-laws were begging for a divorce. Can you even imagine the audacity, the sheer disrespect, and the unbelievable chaos that unfolded? Tell me, was I wrong for feeling completely discarded? Or was I justified in how I reacted when everything exploded? Would you have done the same thing if your son treated you like an inconvenience in your own home? Let me take you back to where this unbelievable story began. It all started when my son, Mark, called me up a few months ago, brimming with excitement. He and his wife, Sarah, were expecting their first child, and naturally, I was over the moon. Mark is my only child, and Sarah, while a bit high-strung, had always seemed like a good match for him. Their wedding had been a lovely affair, and I'd always tried my best to have a good relationship with her family, even though her parents, Richard and Carol, were, well, a lot to handle. Richard was a loud, boisterous man who loved to be the center of attention, always making rather inappropriate jokes, while Carol was a perpetually stressed woman who micromanaged everything and everyone around her, constantly complaining about minor inconveniences. I tried to be understanding, chalking it up to cultural differences or just different personalities. I'm a pretty laid-back person, a widow living comfortably in my modest but cherished home, filled with memories of my late husband. My house isn't huge, but it's cozy, clean, and perfectly suited for one person. It has 2 bedrooms mine, and a guest room that doubles as my craft room, where I spend many happy hours knitting and painting. As the due date approached, the calls from Mark and Sarah became more frequent. They were planning a big baby shower, and Sarah's parents, Richard and Carol, along with her sister, Lisa, and Lisa's husband, David, were all flying in from out of state for the occasion and to be there for the birth. This was all fine, even exciting. I love a good family gathering, and the more the merrier, right? That's what I initially thought. Then, one evening, Mark called me with a proposition that made my jaw drop. He started by saying, "Mom, we have a bit of a logistical problem." My heart sank a little, as it usually does when someone starts a conversation like that. He explained that Sarah's family wanted to stay with them, but their apartment was too small to accommodate everyone comfortably. They only had 1 spare room, and with the baby arriving soon, they really needed their space. He then hesitantly suggested, "So, we were thinking, since you have 2 spare rooms, would it be okay if Richard and Carol stayed with you? It would just be for a week, maybe 10 days at most." I was taken aback. 2 spare rooms. I only had 1 spare room, which, as I mentioned, was my craft room. I certainly didn't have 2 rooms for guests. And even if I did, the idea of having Richard and Carol, with their endless demands and opinions, staying in my peaceful home for over a week, filled me with dread. I loved Mark, but I also loved my quiet solitude. I gently explained to him that I only had 1 spare room, and that it was quite small, mainly used for my hobbies. I also reminded him that I had a small dog, Buster, who wasn't particularly fond of strangers. Mark, however, seemed determined. He started pleading, "Mom, please. Sarah is really stressed with the baby coming. Her parents are insisting on staying close, and it would just be so much easier if they were with you. We'll pay for a cleaner to come before and after, and we'll cover all their food expenses." He even mentioned that it would be a way for me to bond more with Sarah's parents. The guilt trip was in full swing. He added, "It's just for a short time, Mom. Think of it as helping us out during a very important time." I felt trapped. I didn't want to seem unsupportive, especially with my grandchild on the way. I reluctantly agreed, emphasizing that it was only for a agreed upon, period. I figured I could manage for a week or so. What's the worst that could happen? Oh, if only I knew. The day Richard and Carol arrived, I was a nervous wreck. I'd spent the previous day frantically cleaning, moving my crafting supplies out of the guest room, and generally preparing for their arrival. They pulled up in a massive rental SUV, honking the horn before even getting out. Richard, with his booming voice, immediately declared, "Well, well, look at this humble abode." As he surveyed my home, Carol, ever the critic, immediately started pointing out things. "Oh, these curtains are a bit dated, aren't they? And the sofa seems rather small. Where will we put all our luggage?" They had brought enough luggage for a month-long cruise, not a week's stay. My small guest room was instantly overflowing. I tried to be polite, offering them tea and cookies. Carol waved away the cookies, stating she was on a strict diet, and then proceeded to ask for a very specific brand of herbal tea that I, of course, didn't have. Richard, meanwhile, had already claimed the recliner in my living room, stretched out, and turned on the TV to a sports channel, completely ignoring my attempts at conversation. The next few days were a blur of minor annoyances that slowly escalated into major frustrations. Carol decided my kitchen wasn't adequately stocked and proceeded to buy an exorbitant amount of groceries, filling my fridge to bursting with things I would never eat. She also took it upon herself to rearrange my pantry, claiming it was unorganized. Richard used my workbench in the garage to fix something on his rental car, leaving oil stains and tools scattered everywhere. He also made endless phone calls, loudly discussing business deals, completely oblivious to my attempts to read or simply enjoy some peace. My dog, Buster, usually a very sweet and gentle creature, was constantly barking at them, sensing my growing discomfort. They complained about Buster's barking, about my choice of TV shows, about the temperature in the house, about the water pressure in the shower, about everything imaginable. They even commented on the lack of excitement in my neighborhood. My home, which was my sanctuary, felt invaded, violated. I was walking on eggshells, trying desperately to keep the peace for Mark's sake. Then came the baby shower. It was a grand affair at a local event hall, and despite all the stress, I was genuinely excited to celebrate my impending grandchild. Richard and Carol were, predictably, the life of the party, or at least, Richard tried to be, regaling everyone with long, rambling stories and off-color jokes that made me wince. Carol, on the other hand, spent most of the time critiquing the catering and whispering loudly about other guests' outfits. I tried to keep my distance, circulating and chatting with other friends and family. As the shower wound down, Sarah, looking radiant and tired, came over to me. "Mom, thank you so much for everything," she said, giving me a hug. "My parents are so happy to be staying with you." I forced a smile, murmuring something about it being no trouble at all. That night, after a long day, I returned home, hoping for some quiet. Instead, I found Richard and Carol still buzzing from the party, spread out in my living room, watching a loud action movie. They hadn't eaten dinner, assuming I would cook for them. I was exhausted, but I managed to whip up something simple. As we ate, Richard started complaining about the portion sizes at the shower, while Carol reiterated her disappointment with the cake. I just wanted to retreat to my room, but they seemed to have an endless supply of energy. The next day was supposed to be a relaxing one for me, but it was anything but. Carol decided my garden needed a complete overhaul, and Richard wanted me to drive him to a specific hardware store on the other side of town for a part he needed for his car, claiming it was the only place that had it. I politely declined, saying I had other plans, which I did plans to simply exist in my own home. Richard grumbled, but eventually took an Uber. The tension in my house was becoming unbearable. I felt like a stranger in my own home, constantly trying to anticipate their next complaint or demand. I called Mark, hoping he might intervene, gently suggesting that maybe his in-laws would be more comfortable in a hotel. His response was a dismissive, "Mom, it's just a few more days. Their family, you're doing great. Just hang in there for Sarah." I hung up feeling completely unheard and resentful. So that's the situation I was in, and I had to make a choice. I was feeling pushed to my absolute limit, watching my peace and comfort erode with each passing hour. My son, the person I expected to have my back, was essentially telling me to suck it up for his wife's parents. My home, my sanctuary, was a war zone of unsolicited opinions and constant demands. Before I tell you what happened next, what I finally did to reclaim my space and my sanity, I want you to pause right here and comment below. What would you have done in my shoes? Would you have continued to endure, or would you have found a way, any way, to make them leave? Let me know your thoughts before I reveal the truly unbelievable climax of this whole ordeal. The breaking point came, as breaking points often do, over something seemingly trivial. It was a Thursday morning, about 5 days into their stay. I had woken up early, as usual, and was looking forward to a quiet cup of coffee on my porch, enjoying the morning sun. It was my ritual, my small moment of peace before the day truly began. I walked into the kitchen to make my coffee, and that's when I saw it. My favorite, most cherished coffee mug, a handmade pottery mug, my late husband had bought me on our honeymoon, was sitting on the counter, chipped and cracked. It looked like it had been dropped. My heart sank. I picked it up, feeling a pang of sadness. Just then, Carol walked into the kitchen, looking harried. "Oh, that old thing," she said, noticing my gaze. "Richard dropped it this morning. He said it was flimsy anyway. I told him he should be more careful with your delicate items." My blood ran cold. Flimsy? This mug was irreplaceable. It was a tangible piece of my history, and it had been broken with such careless disregard, then dismissed so casually. That was it. The dam broke. All the pent-up frustration, the feeling of being disrespected, the annoyance, the feeling of being walked all over in my own home, it all coalesced into a cold, hard resolve. I looked at Carol, then at the broken mug, and a calm fury settled over me. "Carol," I said, my voice dangerously even, "I think it's time you and Richard found other accommodations." She looked at me, genuinely surprised. "What are you talking about? We're family, and where would we go?" Richard, hearing the raised voices, ambled in, still in his pajamas. "What's all the fuss about, dear? Someone breaks something valuable." He chuckled before noticing the mug. "Oh, that, yeah, slippery little thing, wasn't it?" "No," I stated, looking directly at both of them. "This little thing was a cherished memory, and your continuous disregard for my home, my space, and my belongings has reached its limit. You need to leave today." Richard's face immediately darkened. "Now see here, lady, you can't just kick us out. We're Mark's in-laws. We're here for the baby." Carol started wringing her hands. "This is outrageous. We have nowhere to go. Mark promised us a place to stay." "Mark promised you a place to stay, and for a short time, I provided it," I retorted, my voice still calm, which only seemed to infuriate them more. "But my hospitality has been abused. I've already booked you a room at the Grand High, at downtown, effective immediately. It's paid for the rest of your intended stay. Your luggage is packed and by the front door, and Uber is on its way." I had been busy on my phone while they were still asleep, making arrangements. The sheer surprise on their faces was almost comical. Richard spluttered, You packed our bags. You can't just throw us out." "I can, and I have," I replied, walking over to the front door. which was indeed surrounded by their numerous suitcases. "The Uber will be here in 5 minutes. If you're not out by then, I will call the police for trespassing." I opened the door, letting in the cool morning air, and stood there, arms crossed. Carol burst into tears, accusing me of being heartless and ruining everything. Richard, however, seemed to deflate, a rare sight for him. He saw the resolute look in my eyes and knew I wasn't bluffing. They muttered and grumbled, but they started gathering their carry-ons. As they stepped out the door, the Uber pulling up to the curb, Richard shot me a venomous look. "Mark will hear about this. You'll regret this, old woman," he hissed. "I doubt it," I said, and calmly closed the door behind them. I immediately called Mark, bracing myself for his reaction. I recounted everything, from the broken mug to their constant complaints, and my decision to send them to a hotel. He was, as expected, furious. "Mom, how could you do this? Sarah's parents are calling us, hysterical. They're saying you threw them out. This is going to ruin everything." I remained steadfast. "Mark, they were disrespectful, demanding, and they broke a priceless memento of your father's. My home is my sanctuary, and they violated it repeatedly. I reached my limit." He hung up on me, fuming. I knew there would be repercussions, but a wave of immense relief washed over me. My home was mine again. Buster was wagging his tail, sensing the shift in atmosphere. Less than an hour after Richard and Carol checked into the Grand Hyatt, my phone rang again. It was Sarah. Her voice was trembling, but it wasn't directed at me. "My parents, they're going insane," she cried. "They just called Lisa and David, demanding they come to the hotel right away, and they're having a huge fight. I can hear them screaming at each other from the background." I listened, bewildered. Sarah explained that Richard and Carol, now stuck in a hotel room together without the buffer of my house or other family members to diffuse their constant bickering, were locked in a truly epic argument. Apparently, Richard had started complaining about the cost of the hotel, blaming Carol for not being more insistent on staying with Mark and Sarah. Carol retorted by blaming him for his uncouth behavior at my house, which she claimed was the reason I kicked them out. This escalated into a dredging up of decades of resentments, culminating in Richard shouting, "Maybe we should just get a divorce if you're going to be so difficult," followed by Carol screaming, "Fine, maybe we should." Sarah was beside herself. She could hear them, through the phone, threatening to call lawyers, arguing about who would get what, right there in the lobby of the Grand Hyatt, causing a massive scene. My sending them to the hotel, which had seemed like a drastic measure at the time, had inadvertently removed the social facade they usually maintained. Without other people to perform for or complain about, they were left with just each other, and the flimsy threads of their marriage immediately unraveled. Mark later called, sounding shell-shocked. He'd gone to the hotel to try and mediate, only to find them screaming at each other in the hotel restaurant, throwing accusations back and forth about everything from finances to infidelity. He told me they were genuinely talking about divorcing, and not in a theatrical way, but with real anger and lawyers mentioned. It was chaotic, embarrassing, and completely unexpected. The baby shower was, understandably, overshadowed by the drama. Richard and Carol spent the rest of their stay avoiding each other, communicating only through their children, and eventually their lawyers. They flew back to their home state separately. Sarah eventually gave birth to a beautiful, healthy baby boy, my grandson. While I was thrilled, the entire situation with her parents cast a long shadow. Mark and I had a strained relationship for a while, but eventually, with the arrival of the baby, things began to mend. He slowly started to understand that I hadn't intentionally tried to cause their marital breakdown, but simply stood up for myself. He even apologized in his own way, admitting that his parents-in-law were a handful. As for Richard and Carol, they did, in fact, proceed with the divorce. It was messy, public, and everything you'd expect from two people who thrived on drama. Sarah was devastated, but she also admitted, much later, that her parents' marriage had always been tumultuous, and perhaps my actions had simply sped up an inevitable end. My home, once again, became my peaceful haven. I learned a valuable lesson about setting boundaries, even with family, and about the importance of protecting my own space and well-being. So, that's the whole crazy story. My sons-in-laws begging for a divorce an hour after I sent them to a hotel. It was a whirlwind, and something I never could have predicted. If you were on my side, and you think I was right to stand my ground, please like this video. Subscribe for more stories like this, and definitely share your final thoughts on this whole mess in the comments section below. I'll see you all in the next story.